Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in again. This is Mike Hill on the Everything Went Black podcast. Trying to evolve this thing, figure out what I'm going to be doing. I'd like to thank everyone who's been checking out the Metal Matters podcast. So this episode is going to be more or less a book review about a book I just finished called Knucklehead. But before we get into that, I just want to thank everyone who has transitioned over to listening to Metal Matters. That's the Gimme Radio weekly podcast that I've been slaving away at. We had two really cool episodes in the last few weeks. We had Phil Anselmo, that just went up yesterday as I record this, and Harley Flanagan, two controversial figures in extreme music. I mean, Harley is a legend. He is the founding member of the Cro-Mags, New York City hardcore luminary. And if you're living in New York and you're involved in the New York hardcore scene, you might have mixed feelings about him. However, the fact of the matter is the Cro-Mags really is his band. You know, I mean, no, John Joseph's been out there doing his thing, but that band, they might be sick live. I wouldn't know. I haven't seen that version of the band. But the Cro-Mags JM, that's not really the Cro-Mags. You know, anything, that Harley does, in my opinion, is the Cro-Mags. They got this 7-inch that came out. Everyone on that record has been in the band. It's got Rocky George on guitar, G-Man on drums, Harley on bass and vocals, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but I think he was the guitar player on Alpha Omega. So it's a legit version of the band. The song sounds great. There's new material. Anyway, you can listen to that episode. It was a surprisingly candid look into Harley's life, and it was a trip talking to him. Now, Phil Anselmo, you guys probably remember a few years ago, got himself into some trouble by saying some stuff that some people may have construed as having racist feelings. Now, that was 3-4 years ago at this point. I was really proud of the episode. Most comments have been pretty cool. One person wanted to know if I was going to grill him about the white power stuff. I did not grill him about the white power stuff, and I'll tell you why. When it happened 3 years ago, I think at least 3 years ago, there was plenty of people grilling him about it. He made a statement. You can go on the internet and read it, and I feel like that horse has been flogged to death. On a personal level, I think that Phil is guilty of bad judgment, and I do not believe that Phil holds any kind of white nationalist ideologies. And I've met the man in person. I interviewed him this one time, and I have to say that he's one of the cooler people that I've had the pleasure of talking to. Aside from all that, I mean, I'm not a big Pantera fan. I checked out Cowboys from Hell when it came out, and it was pretty cool. Not really my cup of tea. But I think his post-Pantera work is probably some of the best stuff he's done. I really like Down. Scour is awesome. Superjoint was cool. Superjoint is cool, rather. Tombs played with them down in Dallas a couple of years ago, and they were great live. But his most recent offering, this band N Minor, is quite a departure for him. Oh, and also, let's not forget Philip H. Anselmo and the Illegals, a fine band, kind of melding everything that you might assume Phil would be into. There's like some groove metal, there's some death metal, there's some black metal stuff in there, very, very subtle black metal influence, grind, beat down hardcore, it's pretty much all mixed in with the illegals. And I got a chance to play with them last year at this festival out in Pontiac, Michigan. And it was awesome. They were great. And for those of you out there who still might believe that Phil is racist, I'd like to call to your attention that the majority of the members of the band are people of color. So maybe contact them and ask them if they believe that Phil is racist. So, I don't know. These days, you do something stupid, you say something stupid, and it's part of the pastiche of our society forever. I know I've said really stupid things over the years. I'm sure every one of you has said something really stupid. And, yeah, I mean, if you're, there's just no forgiveness these days. And I so actually another case of no forgiveness. Dragged Across Concrete, a movie that I am really into, came out a few months ago, I think, maybe springtime. I'm a big fan of S. Craig Zahler. I mean, I think Bone Tomahawk is great. Brawl on Cell Block H is awesome. Where I think that's the name of the movie. So I posted something on Instagram, explaining that I love this film. I thought it was great. You guys should all go see it. And, there's a comment that was left there that says, "Oh, have we forgiven Mel Gibson?" And I'm like, what that motherfucker does in his personal life has got nothing to do with me seeing this movie. There's no goddamn way in hell that I am not going to see a movie that Craig Zahler produced because someone out there doesn't approve. I don't know what that makes me. That makes me a free-thinking person in a free society. So, I don't know. I just think there's a lot bigger fish to fry in the world these days instead of paying attention to what people watch as films. And, they might have some guy in there that you don't agree with. You think he might be misogynistic or whatever. So that's your freedom. It's also my freedom to do whatever the fuck I want to do. And let's just kind of leave it at that. Now, the last episode, the intro track, that's Diocletian. They've been around for a number of years, but more in the last few months, I really started getting into this band. Diocletian. And that's the opening track off of Just Sundrian. So if you guys are into war metal, black metal, just gnarly shit, go check that out. So anyway, let's get into this episode. Knucklehead by Adam Smyer. Now, I am a big fan of Eugene S. Robinson. He's been on this podcast several years ago. He's one of my guests, the first time I interviewed him. I've interviewed him on, actually he was on last episode, so forget about that. We were supposed to do a night talk, but for reasons that I'll say have to do more with technology, we were unsuccessful in capturing that conversation in its full glory. So an abbreviated version of that was released last month. And anyway, he's a fascinating guy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the band Oxbow, he's the front man. And that band's been around since the late 80s. And prior to that, he was in a band called Whipping Boy. And in addition to all this stuff, he's an editor-at-large at Ozzy.com. He's the host of Ozzy Confidential, which is their podcast. And they release seasons. It's not like an ongoing thing. There's like season 1, which wrapped up, which had a lot of fascinating interviews. Apparently season 2 is produced and recorded, and we're just waiting for a release date. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Eugene has also written several books. My favorite of his is Fight, which is about fighting and martial arts. And I urge all of you who are interested in that field to check it out. It's got some great stories in there. He's also the host of the weekly Knuckle Up podcast, which primarily deals with MMA, but not exclusively MMA. He talks about philosophies. That's where I got hipped to his idea about past lives. A little bit of politics, lifestyle, and he recommended through his podcast this book, Knucklehead. And just the title alone piques my interest. I think that, that sort of appealed to some of my more baser proclivities in this life. I am a fan of dealing with situations in the most pragmatic sense. Sometimes the most pragmatic sense requires discrete physical confrontation and action. So, based on some of the stuff I had read on the back of the book and Eugene's glowing review of the book and recommendation, I ended up ordering this book from Amazon. And Adam Smyer, he's the author. This is his debut book. And he tells a story which I'm assuming is semi-autobiographical, like in the way that Charles Bukowski used the character Henry Chinaski. I'm assuming that that Smyer uses the character Marcus Hayes to stand in for himself. And, maybe these stories aren't 100% factual, but I think the essence of these stories probably bear a very accurate reflection of his life as a young man. A lot of it takes place in the 90s, so that puts Adam roughly the same age as me, a guy who was in his 20s in the 90s, who's in his 50s right now. And so that as well sort of piqued my interest in this. So the character Marcus Hayes, he's an African-American New Yorker, growing up like in the late 80s, discovers martial arts. There's a system that he utilizes where he keeps track of the days that go without confrontation. And, so there you go. It's kind of sets the table for the kind of guy that he is. In addition to be someone who's into fighting, he seems to be an above average intellect. So he gets into law school, becomes an attorney, and relocates out to the Bay Area. And now, what I like the most about this book is that it definitely tells the story of the quote-unquote black experience in America during the 90s, but it's relatable to white guys like me. Sometimes I read books that have an African-American slant, and it's, I can't relate to it really, because I being a white guy, grew up in the suburbs. My family wasn't poor. I was into like white guy stuff, rock music, that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Punk, hardcore, metal, thrash metal. Typically white guy stuff, Now, Marcus Hayes, the character Marcus Hayes, his family is in the middle class. He grew up in the city, in the not the Lower East Side or like Alphabet City, but in like a solid area. And he had money growing up, not a whole lot, and it was through the hard work of his parents that he was able to enjoy this stability. And that was where I related to the character because, I didn't grow up in some gritty urban environment. I grew up, in Carmel, New York, which is like, hour, 15 minutes north of the city on the Connecticut border. And I didn't have a lot of wants when I was a kid. Very solid Irish, Italian upbringing. Everyone worked. Everyone drove around in new cars. My dad worked at IBM. He had worked his way up. He didn't have a high school education. He had a high school education, never graduated, went into the military, went into the Navy. Both my mom and my dad worked when they got married. They lived in the Bronx. They just achieved through hard work. Moved out of the city because they wanted to have a family, and they had me. So in this case, I identify with Smyer's character, Marcus Hayes, is that had opportunity, did not come from a sort of environment of want. Now, throughout the book, we see that Smyer has this antisocial sort of proclivity with the way he deals with things. He's fascinated by guns. He's always sizing people up. He has no problem using his hands. Trouble seems to find him, which is also something I can relate to as well. Doesn't go out looking for trouble, but somehow always finds himself in these situations. And that was particularly true for me when I was a young man as well. So there's some relationship stuff in the book. The first woman he gets married to, they have what seems to be an incredibly stable relationship. You know, there's this period of calm in his life where they're both making a lot of money. They're both working as attorneys. And I'm not going to give too much of the plot away, but that comes to an end. And then there's a dark period after that. And even some of that, even though in my situation, things were not exactly like that, I found myself in a relationship with a woman. I had just gotten out of college, and quite different from the type of woman you might expect me to be with these days. And, that came to an end, plunged me into this period of darkness and self-examination. And in a sort of Nietzschean sense, I went under to come out on the other side, changed and hopefully improved, debatably improved by some people. So anyway, Hayes goes through this experience of loss, darkness, stops working his job. These are all decisions that are made as a result of a situation that he's forced to deal with. Now let's talk a little bit about magic. Like, I don't believe necessarily in, pulling rabbits out of hats, but I do believe in manifesting things when you meditate with intention. Positive things when positive thoughts are put forth into the world. But also when you create a negative attitude and you're putting negative thoughts out into the universe, that is really the manifestation of demonic energy. That's how I feel. I don't, you guys have your own beliefs. I don't necessarily believe in these, Western ideas of God and the devil and these Judeo-Christian ideas about good and evil. But I do believe that even if it's all internal, you're conjuring certain forces in your life and creating environments, because ultimately we all have, the whole of reality is internal to us. So that's a lot of what I think, quote unquote, magic, MAGICK, is, not casting spells or any of this other stuff. So darkness enters the dark life of Marcus Hayes in the form of a woman, and a lot of violence happens. A lot of really intense shit. You read about it, and at one point, Hayes is unemployed, and he finds himself in court. Now, at this point of the novel, this next thing is what really. I found myself thinking about this for days after I finished the book. He made a statement about how when he was sitting in court, I believe it was at that point that he had this epiphany, that he had become the things that his mother never wanted him to be. And that statement I felt to be very heavy because, like, I've had run-ins with the law at a very young age, but I've generally managed to stay out of real legal trouble for the entirety of my life, actually. So that necessarily wasn't what I was relating to, but what I was relating to, and I have both of my parents. Hayes, the character of Marcus Hayes, only had his mom. Like, his dad wasn't in the picture. He had died at some point. And even his father's death, if you choose to read this book, has some dark sort of stuff around it. And what had resonated with me was how you had a guy who grew up in an excellent family environment, albeit a single, mother scenario. But he had a lot of respect. His mother did a great job of raising him. He had been given opportunities to learn and get a good education. He had secured a good job, yet through whatever personality, I'm not going to say they're weaknesses, but whatever personality characteristics, he had found himself sort of at the bottoming out. And that's what I related to. Now, similar to Marcus Hayes and possibly similar to Adam Smyer, Adam Smyer by way of Marcus Hayes, I'll say, I grew up in an excellent family environment. I had a lot of good role models. I grew up in safety. I didn't grow up on the streets. There was like the normal everyday kid stuff you deal with when you're a teenager, but nothing really intense. I didn't even have the urban dangers that city kids had. I grew up in those safe suburbs. I got a great education. I even scored a great job when I got out of school. Yet I have found myself homeless. I have found myself sleeping on people's couches. I had found myself destitute. And I'm sure my parents had never figured on any of those situations arising in my life. They figured that we're going to make sacrifices. We're going to make sure Michael goes to college, gets a good job, and then it's off to the races, man. The sky's the limit. Get married, have kids, own a house, put some money away, all that kind of stuff. None of those things I've actually done. So, I guess the book stayed with me for days, and it prompted me to look at the bigger picture of my life and maybe not think of just the immediate future and running headlong into situations to hope for the best. And maybe I should apply a certain level of planning and long-term visionary thinking when it comes to the future. And I mean, if you're young and you're in your early 20s and these are all things that are obvious to you about your living your life, then that's great. But for me, it's taken me decades to reach this point of possible visionary thinking. So anyway, it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I give it a 4 out of 5. I don't know if I'll ever reread it, but I enjoyed it. It's in a sort of journalist. Actually, speaking about Bukowski, though his prose style is not that Hemingway, John Fonte style that Bukowski employs, the mechanisms of the book are very similar in that they have this tidbit of information, these anecdotal entries, as if you're reading a diary. Which is what led me to believe that maybe some of these stories had actually been gleaned from Smyer's own personal library. So yeah, I mean, it's an easily digested book. It's a page you can knock out like 50, 60 pages in one sitting. The style is very compelling. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens in the book, like a lot of action items. As a matter of fact, I'm a big Ministry fan. He talks about going to see Ministry. I think that's cool. It also, for those of you who think that people can just be one way, it allows you, the character sort of shows a complexity, being that he's into all sorts of different cultural stuff like Ministry, hip hop, karate, martial arts, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's Knucklehead. Great title, by the way. Adam Smyer, I hope to see more stuff out there by you. I'm a fan. I'm going to be looking out for your next book. And so yeah, it was quite a nice surprise that Eugene had imparted on me. So that's it for this week, guys. I'm going to try to do this sort of freeform, freestyle thing at least twice a month. Maybe it'll turn into a weekly thing. Certainly Metal Matters comes out on a very rigid schedule. Every Tuesday at 00 hours, a new episode is posted. So if you like extreme music, definitely check that out. Also, props to Rachel out there, my good friend Rachel, Austin, Texas Rachel. She listened to the last episode. I still hate fucking PC laptops. They can go get fucked for all I care. She's offered to give me some guidance on getting a new Mac. So props to Rachel. Good looking out, sister. I hope to see you soon, not too far down the line. And you guys all take care, and I will see you when I see you.